then called the Stinking Water River. And I still have a map of that showing it. In fact, it's in that thing that. And he was given the water rights to the Stinking Water River, and he heard about that newfangled thing called irrigation that the Mormons had. And he got a hold of the then president of the Mormon Church, Wilford Woodruff, and asked to have them send a group up. And so our grandfather, Welch, Charles A. Welch, and our other grandfather on the father's side, George Henry Taggart, with I think about 12 other men, horsebacked up to the Stinking Water, where they met Bill Cody at a place called Eagle's Nest. Can you imagine the imagery of that? Huh? And Hopkinson should paint that, in fact. We've got to get a hold of him about that. Maybe he has. And there they were given the rights to the water. And mother's mother had how many children did she have?
9, I think.
How many?
8 or 9.
Did she?
I think
Anyway,
9, the same as.
I thought about 7, but whatever. When after she'd had these children, she decided that they needed another income. Things were very difficult, and she went down to Ogden for about 3 months and learned to be a midwife. And I believe she delivered something like an unbelievable amount of children, like 2,400, without a death, up in the Bighorn. And anyway, they teamed in wagon up the Bighorn. Mother went with that team in wagon. Dad actually didn't. He went by train. Well, I never tell that story normally. Dad always went with them. It's sort of unmanly of him to go up there by train. It took them 31 days, and they'd gone out of northern Utah, and they were out on around Kimmer somewhere, and where a woman lost her baby, right?
Ham's Fork.
Huh?
At Ham's Fork.
Where's that at?
That's at Kimmer.
Kimmer, Ham's Fork, and Grandpa Taggart, who was apparently a pretty good carpenter and a cabinet maker, made a coffin out of the end gate of one of the and Grandpa Taggart and Grandma Welch went with the team and with a dead baby and a man back to Salt Lake City. Almost froze to death, I think, on the trip back. They buried it. But anyway, they went up there and lived for about 3 or 4 years in tents. And in that time, Park County was teeming with wild game. They said you see one herd of 50,000 head. And fact of the matter is, I mean, I'm talking to my brother Scott here, who we call Hank. And when we were kids, all the hay on the 2-dock, this was a ranch that our dad put together, was put up by horses, wasn't it? And I can remember Scott driving horses when I was little. I thought it was a wonderful thing. And the buck rakes, and we stacked the hay. And so we've lived in a sort of a remarkable time in the history of man. And if this tape survives, you wouldn't believe what hardships we put up with.
No electricity.
No electricity. That's
No
right.
no indoor plumbing.
I remember out the ranch when Mac or somebody, maybe it was you, started the old Army generator.
What they call the Kohler.
Kohler plant. It was a Kohler plant, and the naked bulb hanging down would turn sort of yellow. Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah. And by the way, talking about that, I can remember Dad and I riding once. I had a horse that Hink rode, named Rex. Do you remember Rex? Big, tall, had a cold jaw, and he was run away all the time. And he was like Tony, you know, just ride him all the time.
Was that Benny's horse?
I don't remember if Benny, but he was about 16 hands high, great big horse.
That was the one Benny loved.
And I would, and when I get on him, I'd swing up on him with one rein, so he'd spin. Otherwise, he'd run away with me. And I'd take a club or a bat and spur him and hit him, trying to settle him down. And I always rode him with a tight rein. And I mean, it was work all day long. Boy, you just let that rein out and you go, just like it's opening a big throttle on a race car. And I can remember we were all riding back that night from making the circle in Skull Creek Basin. And Dad, for some reason, was riding with us. I don't know why. You know, that few times that he did. And he was on a strawberry roan. I can remember this rather well. And I was fighting this big horse Rex. everyone was, and Dad said to me, "Let's change horses." I said, "All right," and I swung off Rex and just handed him the rein, and I got up in his saddle. He had longer legs than me, but he rode my saddle and I rode his. And he got up on Rex and gave him a loose rein, and Rex walked right in. Ooh, did that bother me, you know? And I've often thought about that. See, the horse knew, who was in control, and he didn't have to ride him with a tight rein. And since then, I've seen men, for example, with wives, you know, try to ride them with a tight rein and beat them and spur them, and some just give them a lot of rein.
Do you remember if the roan was a mare?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember. If you give me the name of it, I could tell you.
Well, remember we had a mare that was called Penelope.
No, that was not the one. No,
I don't remember any other roan.
It was about the time of Handsome. Remember Handsome? Hink.
I'm
I
sorry.
mean, how can you forget Handsome?
Sorry.
He was one of the great horses we ever had. Anyway, Scott used to ride a horse that I inherited when he left, named Tony. I won't tell you his real name. Tony was the name we used around the girls. And I can remember, did he bust your nose once?
No, but he smashed my glasses.
Smash your glasses. Threw his head back up. He's a little horse, maybe 900 pounds. And I can remember riding him across, not Skull Creek, but Skull Creek Basin in a rainstorm, and thunder and lightning. And boy, we were really moving. It was raining, but I was scared he'd fall down. And the lightning struck not more than maybe 200 yards away, and it was just a big purple flame shot out of the ground. And Tony went right down onto the ground, onto his belly, and shook. I was scared to death. And he got up, and boy, did we let out from there. We ran all the way back into the cow camp, you know. But by the way, I can remember being with Dad as a boy, riding with him in the car, and he had always the back seat of the car out, and full of sagebrush and jacks and shovels, and an old 30-06 that he shot coyotes with. He must have shot at me and coyotes. And I can remember riding with him and trying to sleep with my head on his lap, you know, getting car sick. We all got car sick, didn't we? And I told him once, by the way, I said, "Dad, you never loved us." He said, how could you say that? And I said, "You let Mother drive us to Billings." But anyway, I can remember going down with him. I rode with him a lot. I think the reason was not that he liked me, but he just liked to get me away from Mother. You know what I mean? And I can remember once going down to Rolston area, out on the right, sort of almost San Cooley, and I opened the gate for him, and he had a brand new Chevy. I opened the gate in the mud, and the car went through. The front of it went against the post, the gate post. Do you think Dad stopped? Not on your life. He gunned it and ripped the whole side of the car off. I'll bet the car was a week and a half old. He drove that way for a year. Every year about, Bud Webster, as you remember, would come down to the house. Dad never took the keys out of his cars. In fact, I remember when they came to pick me up in Europe on my mission. He was gone for months and left the house wide open and both cars in a garage with keys in the ignition. That was the days, wasn't it? But anyway, Bud Webster about once a year would drive down with a new hoopie, as Dad would call it, and pull it into the driveway and leave the key in it and pull Dad's car out and drive it back. There was no contract. He would just bill. And anyway, we'd go over to one of the great things I remember as a kid is going over to, we'd go up on Polecat Bench and ride around and go down into Franny. And what was the name of that German-Russian woman? I wrote them a letter once about it. There was a woman there in Franny who had a restaurant, and she was sort of considered a communist. But they had a wash pan. Everything, the floors were just made of hardwood, you know, thin like that. Waxed down with a sheen on it, and you sat at a counter around, and you washed your hands in this basin and threw the water out. and she had wrapped legs. She was a heavy woman. And I wrote a letter about that. I've got to dig that up somewhere because that was an interesting thing. I phoned around and got a little bit about it. But this couple came, and he was a cook for, who was the big heavy, not Taft, but who was the big heavy president of the United States?
Roosevelt was heavy.
No, way back before Teddy Roosevelt.
McKinley?
Huh?
McKinley?
No.
No.
Anyway, I had pop my ears so I hear. This guy was a cook for the President of the United States. And then he came back and he had some sort of a, back in the old days you could get ground by
Homesteading?
sort of, yeah, but it wasn't a homestead act. It was something else. I don't remember what it was. And they did it on the right-of-way of the railroad in Franny, Wyoming. And they had this little restaurant there. And, Franny is what? How big is Franny today?
I haven't been there, but I think probably 50 people.
50? Yeah, 100 people, something like that. And we'd stop and eat there. And she was always just immaculately clean. And it was homemade bread and like baked beans, and you'd eat a hamburger, and she'd grind the meat up herself and put peppers in it. It was wonderful. And I've thought of her many times. Lloyd knows her name because I phoned Lloyd, and I phoned around to get the thing to write the letter, and I can't remember who I wrote it to. Boy, that's a piece of stuff you don't want to forget. But anyway, we go down there, and of course, Dad and Mother were from Cali, and when I was older and I could drive, Dad would always say to me, take your mother to go down to Cali and visit. He didn't like to go down there, but so Mother and I would drive to Billings, not to Billings, to Cali, to see Aunt Harriet, And Ray and I have talked about that. Remember they had a separator there on the back porch, and they had a peculiar smell when you walked in the house. And and then of course Billings was like going to the New York City to us. And I can remember when you went to New York City, Scott. Do you remember that? And you came back with a lion's whip.
No, that was Billings.
That was Billings. Yeah, I know, up to the fair.
Yeah, you said New York City.
Oh, I didn't. Well, it was like New York City.
Yeah.
Billings, yeah, it's like going to New York City.
That's right.
Yeah, they had an elevator that went up at Harb Alvin's store, one floor, and they had the trains come through town. It was wonderful. And Scott, as we called him, he went there, and he came back, and he had a little whip that lion tamers use. And we had an old dog there named Tex, a bobtail half-breed collie that stunk all the time because he liked to rub himself in carcasses, didn't he? It was awful. Anyway, he was with us forever. And but anyway, my bed was a child's bed, that you could raise and lower, and he put the Tex in there and then lowered it, and that was the cage. Remember that? And Tex was the lion. That's when he took a dart he made out of a darning needle, about this long. Well, I'm one-handed. You heard of the story about the guy that there was a fisherman. He was one-handed, and they said, "How big?" He said, "I caught a big fish." And he said, "How big was it?" And he said, "It was that long." Anyway,